Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the final conversation in our Emerging Practice lecture series. The Emerging Practice series really highlights Caribbean design practices with distinct methodologies. The practices produce accomplished bodies of work rooted in the praxis of designing in the Caribbean context and all that means culturally, materially, economically, and politically. This year, we're exploring what it means to expand design practice. We are particularly interested in how designers work within Caribbean cultural forms and material realities while responding to modern production systems. I'm Jordan Channel. I'm the program director at Island City Lab. We are a think tank that aims to democratize the processes that initiate, build, and inform towns and cities across the Caribbean. We're really excited today to be joined by Dr. Vernelle Noel. Dr. Noel is an assistant professor of computational design at Carnegie Mellon University and the director of the Situated Computation and Design Lab. Her research is at the intersection of embodied creative practices, technological practices, and society. She uses an interdisciplinary approach. She builds new frameworks, methodologies, and expressions to explore social, cultural, and political aspects of computation and create new reconfigurations of practice, pedagogy, and publics. She's the co-editor of the new book, Critical Computation Relations in Design, Architecture, and the Built Environment with Dr. Jana Boeva, which explores how computational practices, tools, and methods mask the social, political, and environmental entanglements. Dr. Noel is also a TEDx speaker. So, Dr. Noel, thank you so much for being here. Want to hand it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Thank you very much. Whenever you're ready, we could start. Thank you very much, and to those of you joining us, I look forward to our conversations and your questions. Okay. So today I'm going to chat with you all a bit about my work in craft practices and computation. Next slide. And Jordan mentioned all the things before that I'm faculty at Carnegie Mellon University and director of the Situated Computation and Design Lab. Next slide. And so in my research, I use computational ideas or mobilize computational ideas and methods to examine craft and making practices and mobilize ideas and concepts found in these sites of making to develop new frameworks, new methods, and expressions in computation and design research, practice, and pedagogy. Next slide. My work is both technical and conceptual. So technical in that it understands what we do and comes up with new and novel ways for us to do things. It's also conceptual in that it asks that we come up with new ways in which we should think about things. So this includes my examination of knowledges and practices, tools and technologies that we use and develop, the communities that develop around these practices and their outcomes in both craft practices and computational design ones, or low-tech practices and high-tech practices. Next slide. And I do this work by engaging in ethnographic work, so field work at these different sites. Next slide. By conducting experiments and workshops to examine or evaluate the tools or processes that I might develop. Next slide. By repatriating that knowledge, by teaching the things that I learn or develop. Next slide. And by making and building things. As an architect, a maker, designer, it's the way I understand the world and the way, as a designer architect, it's what we do, right? Next slide. I also build installations and sculptures as forms of continued exploration and sharing of developments and ideas of making techniques and ways we might go about doing this, and exhibiting installations and sculptures around the world. Next slide. This is an example of a current traveling exhibition with Malcolmy, where I made a boat using wire bending techniques for this math art exhibition. Next slide. And I engage in craft practices or learn craft practices as part of my work. Next slide. Um, It also includes exploring these crafts, these tectonics at the architectural scale. So these are 3 pavilions that I designed and fabricated around wire bending and ways in which we might think about wire bending, which I'll get to later in the talk. But these are things that I do. I also build pavilions to explore tectonics and craft at the architectural scale. Next slide. I curate exhibitions. So this is an exhibition I had around design and making in Trinidad Carnival, exploring different ways of engaging with wire bending. Next slide. And as an academic, writing is my job. So these are journals that I write in. Next slide. And book contributions. Book contributions or edited books around the things that I think with, write with, and produce. Okay, next slide. And so 2 questions that motivate my work are: how might ideas, methods, and technologies in computation or computational design repair craft and cultural design practices? And 2, how might ideas and methods in these craft and cultural practices repair how we think about computation? Next slide. And why is this important? To undo damages of the past and today, and to prevent them in the future. 2, to improve current and future processes, technologies, pedagogy, etc. And 3, to consider the small repairs we might make, or the seemingly small repairs that we might make, and their larger societal implications. Next slide. Why? To address problems of disappearance and erasure. So the erasure or disappearance of certain knowledges, certain skills, histories, and communities, the exclusion of these and other histories in discourses around computation and technology, and changing practices due to global, societal, economic, and technological shifts, because these often impact society's least privileged. Next slide. And so the example that I'm going to share with you all today is a case study of the Trinidad Carnival, and specifically the craft of wire bending in the Trinidad Carnival. And here, when I say Trinidad Carnival, it is the Trinidad and Tobago Carnival, but in the literature, Carnival existed as the Trinidad Carnival before we became Trinidad and Tobago, right? So Trinidad Carnival, Trinidad and Tobago Carnival, same thing. So the Trinidad Carnival is tied to slavery, and the first record of enslavement in Trinidad was in 1606. The French planters introduced Carnival to Trinidad in the 1780s. And while Africans engaged in carnival festivities during enslavement, after slavery was abolished in 1834, the formerly enslaved reinvented carnival to celebrate their freedom, express their creativity, aesthetic sensibilities, and to reclaim their humanity in the face of a system that considered them less than human. So while the French and those of European descent participated in carnival for fun and frolic, for those of African descent, carnival was like a religion. cathartic, a psychological release of tensions and stresses of oppression, domination, segregation, and violent, inhumane systems of control. On the right is an engraving from 1888 of carnival celebrations in Port of Spain, Trinidad. Next slide. And so several carnivals have spawned from the Trinidad Carnival to other parts of the world. There is a carnival near you. So there's carnival in Jamaica. I see we have people from New York. There's a carnival somewhere. And like I mentioned, the term Trinidad Carnival doesn't bound where the carnival happens, but rather refers to its origin and the main elements that define the carnival. So mass or masquerade, the steel pan or the steel drum, also invented in Trinidad and Tobago in the 1930s, and the music that's native to Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean, calypso and soca music. Next slide. So carnival is rooted in expressions of joy. Everyone here who has a carnival near them, and Island City, you all are in the Caribbean, so you all know it's rooted in joy, creativity, innovation. Here are photos of masqueraders wearing costumes and performing them during carnival. Next slide. The history of carnival is also rooted in celebrating resistance and emancipation from enslavement, from cruel forced labor and its many materializations. So these are images of Jab-Jabs, Blue Devil characters in Juve in Carnival, and they originate from the celebration of resistance from enslavement. Just note, okay? Next slide. Carnival is also rooted in community with social interaction and togetherness, mentoring and cooperation, and community engagement, where people come together to design and make costumes and sculptures for the carnival, teaching and learning, organizing and participating in events in their communities. Next slide. Carnival is also about public education. Here is a photo of George Bailey's winning band from 1957, back to Africa. And I think of Carnival as the internet of that time, public education in art, in history, storytelling, all of it wrapped up in Carnival. So people portraying and educating publics on their histories, both real and imagined, past and future, showcasing creativity, innovation, and beauty using everyday materials. So Carnival is about seemingly disparate things dwelling together: enslavement and freedom, good and evil, scary and beautiful. It's a space of entanglements. Next slide. And these large artifacts that you see here, we call kings and queens of Carnival. I call dancing sculptures. These are expressions of very creative selves or creative histories of technical skill, of innovation, commentary on social and political issues, environmental issues. This is where and how we speak through Carnival. Next slide. And this is a photo of wire benders. And so wire bending is a craft practice that's integral to the design and fabrication of costumes and dancing sculptures in Carnival. In the 1930s, wire bending was described by scholars as one of the most highly developed Carnival crafts in the 1930s, okay? And this craft developed then where wire and other linear materials are sculpted to create these large structures, which are then decorated and performed in Carnival. The photo on the left is from 1969. The photo on the right is an image of expert wirebender Stephen Derrick performing wire bending. Next slide. And some of the issues happening within wire bending, but also many other craft practices today, include that we have little to no documentation of those knowledges, that there is a slow transmission of these knowledges, that our experts are dying, and that we have changing practices. Okay, next slide. But why is it important that we pay attention to the issues? Well, craft is embedded in historical, social, and political frames. So their disappearance, their erasure, their resurgence tells us things about societies and cultures. It tells us something. Two, because this knowledge is tied to its practitioners, when they pass away, they take that knowledge with them, making it more challenging to pass on this culture, pass on skills, and pass on knowledge. And thirdly, studies have shown that the quality of one's craft skills is closely related to the strength of their ties in a community. So strong craft skills, strong ties to a community, weak craft skills, weak ties to a community. And in this context, we want strong community ties. And finally, think of practices as a language, a way of communicating, a way of telling stories, a way of world making. And so you wouldn't want your language or your voice to disappear, right? So these are four points as to why it's important that we pay attention to practices that we may be losing. Next slide. Some of the consequences when these practices disappear or are disappearing include a loss and a trivializing of people's histories and cultures. So education is impacted, a loss of knowledge and skill, fragmenting of communities and social relations, and technical interventions or discourses that are absolutely devoid of context or unmoored. Next slide. And so what I'm going to share with you today is my work specifically in the craft of wire bending that's embedded in the Trinidad Carnival. So the Bailey Derrick grammar I will touch on later, but this project addresses little to no documentation of this craft that is at risk and the slow transmission of this knowledge. Next slide. So you're going to see some drawings as we move forward, and I want you to think about this as the mathematics of wire bending that I am figuring out in this process. Next slide. This is a photo of Stephen Derrick, who was one of the wire benders, one of several that I studied during my fieldwork. So this is a photo of him wire bending. Next slide. And here on the left, Stephen Derrick. On the right, this is an image of my beginnings of describing the craft using symbols, operations, and rules based on analyzing the artifacts that he had at his place, observing what he was doing, interviewing him, and participating in the craft to make this tacit, this embodied knowledge explicit. Next slide. Here are on the left sort of the materials, the vocabulary of materials used by him and used in the practice. Next slide. And on this slide, some of what that grammar looks like. So what you all are seeing today is just a snippet of it. The grammar itself has more than 48 rules that continue to grow. But this is just a snippet of what it looks like. On the left, the starting shape or the material being used, and on the right, particular tectonics associated with the craft. Next slide. Hold on. I messed my screen up. Here, another example of that grammar that is showing the steps that are involved in making certain techniques so that one can follow these steps, these rules, and engage in making the tectonics necessary for wire bending. Next slide. Here is an image showing the rule on top, the steps to make that rule, and a photo of what that looks like. All right, next slide. Again, the material being used here, aluminum rods, the step or rule associated with making a particular part, in wire bending, and the photo below shows how the wire bender was engaging in making that particular part or tectonic for the craft. Next slide. Another example of using aluminum rods, the rules, the steps, and a photo showing how that shows up on site. Next slide. And so the resulting grammar is a series of drawings that describe the materials, steps, and techniques in wire bending. The grammar allows for analysis, understanding, and the transmission of wire bending expertise, wire bending skill, wire bending knowledge for education, research, and practice, shedding light on the craft's computational dimensions and opening it up for expansion and inquiry. So the grammar externalizes and formalizes the tacit or hidden rules embedded in wire benders, which is particularly important when our craftspersons may be retiring from practice or dying. Next step. Next slide, sorry. This is an example of how the grammar can be used to document the processes. So more than the thing that you make, but how do you capture how something was made? This is an example of how we can use the grammar to document our processes of fabricating an artifact. Next slide. And here is Albert Bailey on the left and Stephen Derrick on the right, who I named the grammar after because I studied them, their work, and learned the craft from them. They have since passed away. Next slide. This particular paper has more on the grammar that you're free to read. Okay, next slide. And so now I'll share with you my ways in which I've explored using the computer when it comes to wire bending, because something doesn't need to be done with a computer for it to be computational. The Bailey Derrick grammar is computational, but I do not use computers, right? And so in my exploration of using computers in wire bending, it included digital design and fabrication methods and technologies. This was done to explore labor in wire bending. Wire bending by hand is labor intensive, but digital fabrication is also just differently. But so it's exploring different kinds of labor. But I wanted to learn or to understand how we might open up the practice and participation in wire bending through these physical, if one has physical limitations of strength, for example, because these wire benders have very strong hands. It requires a grip strength for certain wire thicknesses that may be out of reach for some of us. How we might open it up to those who might want to engage in computer technologies, how we open it up for children, how we open it up for those currently missing in the practice. Next slide. And so I taught a course where I had 11 students, 8 women, 3 men. 10 out of the 11 self-reported little to no experience in wire bending, but developed these 3 different ways of engaging with wire bending and then explored what it might mean for what the results in wire bending might be, right? So computational crafting, employing the Bailey Derrick grammar, crafting fabrication, aiding the labor-intensive part of wire bending using computer-controlled wire bending machines and the digital design software, although you don't have to with that particular machine. And then digital crafting, where I developed a speculative software to engage in design and fabrication. Next slide. And here are a few images of the details and artifacts made when using the Bailey Derrick grammar and hand tool. So it's thinking with that grammar differently, right? So thinking through connections and shapes to explore what we can make or what students could make. Next slide. Here, students explored using a CNC wire bender These are some images of some of the artifacts that were made using these machines. Next slide. The third approach I call digital crafting, where we employ digital design and fabrication using a speculative software that I developed that takes shape as input, redescribes it, and develops 3D printing joinery for the connection of linear materials. Next slide. And these are some of the images of that experimental software. Next slide. And so in this particular method developed to aid in design and fabrication, these are some of the connections and some of the artifacts made by students. Next slide. All right, we could go to the next slide too. All right, so the resulting what I learned from the exercise, let's say, is that students could learn not only computation through the craft of wire bending, but they could learn about wire bending through the practice of computation, through the mathematics of shapes of wire bending. Next slide. And so after teaching and exploring these approaches, we then built a pavilion using these techniques to further explore what wire bending might be able to tell us about architecture and structures, what the large scale can tell us about wire bending. Next slide. And because we had the Bailey direct grammar, a computational description of the craft, we tested and we created tectonics for the pavilion using those as a point of departure, as a start. Next slide. And so here are a few new tectonics that were designed, developed, and tested for application at the architectural scale. And new tectonics of the language being possible because of the Bailey direct grammar. Next slide. This is an image of our pavilion built using these techniques. Next slide. Another image of it. Next slide. And from it, we came up with new additional rules for the grammar at the architectural scale. Next slide. So new communities of wire benders can continue invention of the craft, implying intergenerational and intercultural connections between traditional and contemporary practices through design. Next slide. So computation as a way of extending engagement in wire bending by recovering these cultures of making in Carnival, by preserving the craft, but while substituting traditional techniques with new software-based ones and generating new tectonics, and reconfiguring the practice by fostering new communities of wire benders and computational designers. So in practice and in learning. Next slide. So active bending structures, this is another project. Active bending structures are an approach to creating form, three-dimensional form, and curved geometry from two-dimensional materials. That could be planar or linear materials, using the stresses and elastic deformations that are embedded in these materials. All right, next slide. On the left are costumes from the Trinidad Carnival, designed by Peter Minshall in 1984. This particular band launch, or this band, it was called Callaloo, and these are active bending structures, textile hybrids. On the right is the structural frame of the pavilion before covering it. And building on the resulting geometry and the behavior of the materials in that pavilion, we designed another pavilion for a lightweight structures conference and exhibition in Barcelona. Next slide. Here our design comprised the three modules. So the exhibition and conference was around lightweight structures. So people from all over the world who were invited had to go to Barcelona and install our pavilions, right? So our design comprised three modules, each rotated 120 degrees from each other. And we selected this particular design after doing several tests and experiments because of its modularity, its geometric simplicity, and its coiling possibilities for packaging and transportation. Next slide. So we built a 1/3 scale study from 316 diameter rods. And the thing with active bending structures, they are hard to predict their behaviors. And so either through very expensive simulation software or building models at different scales, you translate how they may behave at different scales, right? So these are examples of different scales that we built parts of our pavilion and the entire pavilion to understand how it might behave. Next slide. And the mobility of the project supports the mobile temporary nature of Carnival, frankly, with quick construction, disassembly, exhibition, and transportation. On the left is our entire pavilion packaged for transportation. I bought a drum case, so we coiled all our rods, put them in there. And on the right, our exhibition or installation of the pavilion at the exhibition. Next slide. And so we exhibited this work at IASS in 2019, among other pavilions around the world. So we demonstrate that by bringing together traditional crafts, cultural practices, we can broaden the design space, uplift low-tech cultural practices, and open architecture, computational design, etc., for participation by people, cultures, and knowledges that are currently missing, integrating the social and the technical with the structural, material, and cultural. Next slide. So wire bending at the start of this study in 2013 was the bending of linear materials to create two-dimensional form. But based on all the studies I've done so far, including ethnographic research, it's more than that, right? It's a coming together of interactions between material, community, senses, and the moving body, while designing and making with static and dynamic linear materials for concurrent expressions of each in three-dimensional space. Next slide. I continue to make artifacts grounded in linear elements because I'm obsessed with lines. And so these are images of an exhibition I had in 2022 to 2023. Next slide. And if you go to this website, you could get a tour of that website. Feel free of that exhibition. Feel free to do that. Next slide. And before I close, I just want to stress again why it's important that we engage in our local practices, that we preserve our local practices, because our practices tell the stories of histories and cultures of our people. We wouldn't want those things to disappear. Secondly, when our practitioners die, they take that knowledge with them, so we lose valuable knowledge and skills. Thirdly, there's a link between craftsmanship or making skills and one's social ties. And fourthly, thinking of these practices as a language, as a voice, a way that we communicate and tell stories. And next slide. So that we fight against the resulting consequences of these things, such as a trivializing of histories and cultures, losing skill and knowledge, fragmenting communities, and engaging with technological approaches to possibly solving problems that are not informed by cultural practices and histories. Next slide. And this is just sharing with you the areas in which my work contributes to areas of knowledge. So in architecture, in design computation, in heritage structures, arts and technology, and cognitive science. And I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Vernelle, thank you so much. That was amazing. I think what I'm struck by most about the work that you're doing is the kind of archival processes that expand beyond. It's a way of using an archive and like expanding it beyond the archive. I kind of want to start the discussion there. I think what you're doing is you're documenting technique into like a source code, understanding a source code of it. Um, but there's also like an embodied knowledge in the practitioner that you're trying to understand as well, which is informed by histories that you're not even aware of, right? And you're trying to like understand it and document that and understand it, break it down into, as you said, the language, right? The grammar of it, right? So I was hoping you could talk more about that documenting process, particularly why it's important to the process of like this craft computation marriage that you're working on. The importance of archiving and documenting to the process that you're doing.
Sure. There is no one way to engage in computation, and computation is really about the process, right? Not just what you end up with, but we really ask about how you got there. What was the process? Because there's thinking, there are all the things, all the richness, I think, happens in that space between when you start a project and the final product. For me, the rich part is in the middle. Um, and for this particular site of study, and when I say site, I mean the site of wire bending within the context of the Trinidad Carnival is very rich. It's not the question I started with. My question, I was interested in how I might engage in computational ways in the carnival, but en route to finding out about that, found out about wire bending, which has led to several different questions. So it's not like I planned to have these questions. Questions just emerge from doing the work. And so, for grounding that history, I think for all our practices as trained architects, you have to study the site, right? And so the site are our peoples, the site are our histories, the site is our environment. I think a rich understanding of that not only helps the work that we do, but it honors the history of that work. For me to talk about wire bending without contextualizing the people and the history from which that was born would be doing it at an unjust or disservice, right? So in some ways, it's using computation to share these stories, which are often unknown, unspoken of, or erased.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing about it, the sort of ethnographic study you did, I feel one of the reasons we started this series in the first place actually was because a lot of architects and designers in the Caribbean don't have a lot of time to like talk or think about their work. They're sort of in the process of doing a lot, right?
Yeah.
And so I imagine when you're talking to these wirebenders, this is something that is natural to them. They haven't matched it out in the way that you have. You know what I mean? They haven't like been given specific opportunities. I mean, they might teach it, but they haven't like given specific opportunities to like talk about it in a sort of um, diagnostic way, if that makes sense, right? So I find that like very interesting that like breaking down of it uh, into mathematics, into a grammar. That's really interesting. But I think one question I am curious about is what are the risks of translation between this knowledge that is embedded in the practitioners to an algorithmic system to like a computational system? What do you risk losing or risk like getting lost in translation?
Great question. Um, so which I did not include in this presentation, but after developing sort of a framework for this grammar, I went back to Trinidad and Tobago and conducted experiments with students and teachers to see if it worked. I could make something, but it mightn't work, right? So I went to some high school teachers and students to test what happens. Does this thing work and what happens? Because I have no clue. I could have a hypothesis that it would work. And from that experiment, realize that yes, it works. So it works to teach the craft. The before and after was clear. The way people were able to think through and understand the craft was clear. But the thing that was amazing that I did not hypothesize was how it opened up a collaborative approach to the craft. So currently, I wouldn't say currently, but if Stephen Derrick or they're teaching it, like he's one person and he is teaching the craft to one or a few others, but you need a very close engagement. You need geographic proximity to understand and learn the craft from Mr. Bailey, right? Or Mr. Derrick. But with the grammar, students were able to be the one who documents the steps that people do, who analyzes the artifacts. They could now discuss an entire project with more than one person. So our value of mentoring or value of shared education or values of community, those things are reinforced by the grammar, right? Now, in another lens, like a question I often get asked is, what if someone takes this grammar and they go making a lot of things and, they're making a lot of money, etc.? That question often comes up. And my response to that is, it depends on the values of that particular site. So in our context, the site of Trinidad and Tobago where this craft is dying, or let's say the site of those who engage in these craft practices, our values are community, our values are like teaching each other, our values are how we get together. Those are our values. Our values are not about getting $1 million, right? Those are the values of another context. So to sort of framing that answer, I think of the grammar as traveling with its values, such that who I share it with, even today I was teaching my students some things like I preface those values. The values of me sharing this practice with you or these techniques are around community engagement, they're around community participation, they're around sociality, they're around sharing. Like these values come with this craft. If you aren't going to engage in these values, please don't, right? All of this to say that technology reveals certain things, but it also affords certain things. So my response is having a critical lens to what these computational or technological ways, how they might shape or frame or distort or add to our values or what we want to be our values.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think um kind of building on that, like what I am like interested in also is sort of these practices are have sort of a cultural and geographic embeddedness in them, right? They are rooted in sort of the cultural practice of carnival, in other words, right? And then you sort of understand the grammar of it, and when you who doesn't have that cultural geographic connection, like your students, for example, right? When they're trying to use the grammar, I think there is like different forms. They have different references,
Sure,
and they're speaking a different language almost with the same
sure,
sort of grammatical structure, right?
sure.
So I guess what have you learned, like you're a Trini person, what have you experienced from like non-Trini people like trying to apply these techniques and this grammar? Like what references have you seen pop up out of that?
Yeah, so the students who I engaged it with were architecture students. So while those at home, like we have the context of Carnival as our frames, right? To inform how or what we make. Not that I was examining the things that they made. That was not the purpose of the experiment. But for students who, and I could speak for architecture students, they're not that they were thinking through architecture, but the ways in which they were to think through these tectonics. Again, they're college students, not high school students. So there were differences, not in terms of the tectonic, but ways in which it might be explored to do cool things. So it opened up the practice differently.
Yeah, yeah. That
Yeah.
I think that brings me perfectly into this framework of situated computation that you've developed. I think it's the first kind of discourse that I've encountered that looks at parametric design not as like this, means of production of like making cool, ridiculous, metal panels on a building, but like it's actually like a knowledge system.
You're
Like you're,
sick of them panels. I'm kidding. I'm
yeah,
kidding.
no, I understand completely. But you're like you're understanding parametric design as like a knowledge system or computational design
Yeah.
as a knowledge system. I guess as you're developing this, like what are the current approaches to the way computation is like taught to students? I know when I was in school, there was like high value placed on it, high value on creating like form without context, or high value on creating like an image or a product, right? So what are you like challenging in terms of how computation is taught or discussed with this idea of situated computation?
Thank you very much. I like that question. I am challenging that universal way of thinking about computation as, oh, we're just making cool stuff. And to understand that every culture, every context has a form of computation that I think is linked to the way those of that particular culture and history think, the materials that's accessible to them. Um, but I want to challenge the universal framings of computational design, where when you Google it, you see the same image over and over. It's Revit architecture, but understanding that from our local, low tech, high tech, or other, from the infrastructures and resources that we have, we too can think computationally. We too can, no, let me frame that. We too can describe what we do as computational, and with those techniques, rethink or reframe what design might be like. And that's
Yeah,
for education and practice, not just practice, but teaching what we do.
yeah, I think um, the other thing is this the what you described very clearly in your presentation was the risks of um, losing these knowledges, right?
Yeah.
These like approaches and methodologies and knowledges. The contextless technical conversations that are seen as objective um,
Mhm.
and not like at all political, which there are. I think that's one thing, but I think there's also a sort of geopolitical reshaping of production of how
Yeah.
things are made. Like globalization is a big part of that, right? And I think like in Jamaica, I know carpentry is dying because of all all the imported like cheap furniture that comes in, and a lot of carpentry shops are dying. So that craft knowledge is lost as well. And I think similarly in Trinidad, the the loss of wire bending or the slow decline of these craft forms is directly related to globalized means of productions where people can buy carnival costume, like custom mass-produced carnival
Yeah.
costumes cheaper or
Yeah.
or quicker and in way bigger numbers that can just make a big order and bring a container in rather than like engage with the actual practice, and they lose the whole context of the whole carnival when that happens, right? So I
Yeah.
guess how do you see this like marriage of high tech and low tech, like bridging that gap between like mass production and like obvious needs for like
Yeah.
quote unquote modernization
Yeah.
and like continued engagement in cultural practice. How do you say this thing that you're developing as like the bridge between that? Yeah.
It's a lot. So maybe I'll just talk about two things that I want us to think with. Um, hmm. It's a lot. I'll just mention, I think, two things. One, um, being aware of the knowledges that we're losing by the quickness that capitalism gives us. I want us to understand that that is a real loss, right? Like histories, cultures, identities, we can't all think the same way. We're not supposed to. There are certain different ways that we learn, different ways that we understand the world. We all do not do that the same way. And so I think my encouragement for all of us would be to not take things for granted, and that your history and your culture is really important. If it wasn't that important, government administrations wouldn't be trying to ban histories, right? So understanding of people's histories and of people's culture, your own, is very important for the way you show up in this world and the things you understand. And for me, it's the way I learn, right? I need material things to think. I can't just think through code, right? So knowing that you learn differently in different ways and exploring the multiple modes through which you understand the world is very important. Um, and yes, it's, globalization, capitalism is a thing, but there are consequences to your culture being misread, misinterpreted, for others to not be educated. Like there are real consequences to these things. So I want us to think through the um the bad consequences we are when we feel like we have to be forced and up to date on everything technological without a grounding of who we are, why we're doing what we're doing, and the innovations that we have that they may be low tech, but in many ways it's high tech, right? There are several things that highly technological societies can't even get done that we in low tech societies have already gotten done, right? So it's about framing what high tech is, what low tech is, but values and the things, the contributions that we bring with what we have.
Yeah, I think yeah, I completely understand. I agree, and I think like we feel that every day, like in the Caribbean, and yeah, the idea of low tech, high tech is a political
Yeah,
distinction, right? What is low
yeah.
tech? You've kind of proven the computation in um, wire bending, which is quote unquote a low tech production technique. But I want to transition quickly into audience Q&A. We don't have a lot of time and we have a lot of questions. I took
Sure.
up a lot of time because I was particularly interested in the work that you do. But I think let's start with the first one. Shola asks, do you think repair as a design method can help reframe larger systems like infrastructure?
So I don't think of a repair as a method, but as a way I think about things so that we could hone in on what kind of repair we are attempting to do, that we have done, or that might be incoherent. So one of my newest papers, I talk about repair through these lenses of restoration, remediation, and reconfiguration. Everything needs repairing. Okay, everything. Nothing is perfect. As long as we're on this wood, everything needs repair. So my answer to your question would be yes. And how we go about doing that or asking those questions is the fun part, but yes.
Great. Femi asks, with the growing connections between Caribbean and Nigerian diasporas, especially through new direct flights, how do you see the role of cross-cultural exchanges in advancing these computational and craft-based practices, and how might they influence the preservation and innovation of cultural heritage in your work?
In my work specifically, or generally in craft practices?
It's in your work, yeah.
If I think in my work currently, I have not engaged with wire bending in the African context. Although I actually have a thing one of my students gave me. He's from Ghana, a wire bend artifact from Ghana. But I haven't gone to the continent to examine their wire bending practices. Unfortunately, not as yet. Yeah.
That is interesting. This idea of the sort of your experience with this case study in Trinidad and how that applies to other like craft forms and computational forms would be interesting as well. But less about my questions, more into the audience Q&A. Mackenzie asks, I'm curious what you imagine the next step in the process to be. How do you imagine pushing this even further? Or if that idea hasn't presented itself yet, what application of this work have you found the most rewarding? So how do you push it
Hi,
further and what is
Mackenzie.
most rewarding? Yeah.
So first of all, let me say hi, Mackenzie. We were at UF together, though I don't think we knew each other then, but then we were at Georgia Tech together. So hi, Mackenzie. The reason why I'm unable to answer is because it's in everything that I do. What has been most exciting, I think, exploring what happens when the grammar is used by others. All right. I hope to do more of that in Trinidad and Tobago. But these things cost money. That's a reality of research. And thinking with the grammar for ways that we translate into different tectonics is exciting to me. That's what I'm beginning to look at now. And even how with digital fabrication, we think more critically about digital fabrication and what that looks like in contexts like those that have undergone colonialism, that have had our resources extracted out from under us, how we engage with these technological infrastructures differently. So it's always revolving. It's a lot of moving parts. There is no one thing. It's just a lot, but a lot of exciting things.
Great. And then the last question is, with the exportation of Trinidad Carnival across the world, are you seeing the loss of this history, craft, and cultural, which is made worse by mass production of carnival costumes? Are there places outside of Trinidad that are doing a good job of documenting, sharing, and foregrounding that history?
We have great resources. The Caribbean, the journal escapes me, but it's our Caribbean journal, Caribbean Studies journal, that has from the 1950s or 60s amazing documentation on Carnival. And that's where the histories of my work come from. We have archives in the Caribbean around Carnival. We have carnivals all over the world. But my ask would be that those of us who are part of this culture, who engage in this, that we study the histories and the cultures, right? Because things die, books are banned, things burn. But we are the ones who carry these things on. So our knowledge of these histories, understanding, and how we discuss these things with people, I think are important. That Carnival is more than a frolic. It's more than a frolic. For certain people, it started as a fun and frolic, but for us, those who were enslaved or formerly enslaved, it served a different purpose. So understanding that history and communicating that history so that you lay the groundwork that yes, we frolicking, but this is on the grounds of people losing their lives and their humanity for this to happen. So I think the onus is on us, literally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a perfect place to end the discussion. I'm very cautious of time and everybody's time. Vernelle, I want to thank you so much. I've followed your research for a while, so it's been like this is a very exciting presentation for me to finally have you on the Emerging Practice series. This is the final one in the series, and we will be um, documenting all these, recording them, and putting it on our YouTube page for anyone who might have missed it to see what we have talked about. So thank you again, Vernelle, Dr. Noel.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. And thank everyone who joined us for all of the Emerging Practice lecture series. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely weekend.
Bye, everyone. Thanks so much.
Bye. Thank you.